Thank you, Susan. It is 24 minutes to 9. Back in the summer, the former governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn, was a relatively lonely voice among the economic establishment. In his view, after the Brexit vote, the things might be all right. There was no need to panic, he said. And later in the year, he doubled down on that. He welcomed the fall in the value of the pound. So what does Mervyn King, Lord King as he is now, make of the picture as we head into 2017, to the actual triggering of our departure and to the decisions about how we do it and what the terms need to be? I've been talking to Lord King about the state of the world economy, but we began with Brexit Britain.
Well, I think the challenges we face mean that it's not a bed of roses. I think no one should pretend that. But equally, it's not the end of the world. And there are real opportunities that arise from the fact of Brexit that we might take. We could totally redesign our subsidies to agriculture. We have a chance to create a new relationship with the Republic of Ireland to deal with Northern Ireland. There are many opportunities, and I think we should look at it in a much more self-confident way than either side is approaching it at present.
A more positive way?
Yeah, I think we should. And I think that being out of what is a rather unsuccessful European Union, particularly in the economic sense, gives us opportunities as well as, obviously, great political difficulties.
I want to turn to what's going on in the European Union in just a second. First, though, just to drill down, as it were, on what the opportunities are. Are they opportunities that we could take if we stay in the customs union? In other words, if we don't have our own trade deals with the rest of the world?
I think it's more difficult to take advantage of those opportunities. I mean, certainly I think we can redesign our own subsidies in many ways, but I don't think it makes sense for us to pretend that we should remain in the single market. And I think there are real question marks about whether it makes sense to stay in the customs union. Clearly, if we do that, we cannot make our own trade deals with other countries.
So basically you are in favour of what some people call a hard Brexit, but a situation where we do properly break away from the structures of the European Union and deal with it as outsiders.
I don't like the phrases hard and soft because there are many different dimensions, but let me just set out three things that seem to me central to it. One is the legal position, where the government has quite rightly said that it will introduce a bill to repeal the European Communities Act of 1972, under which we joined, and a short bill to grandfather all existing legislation so that our Parliament can take its time to decide which, if any, European legislation in the future we want to ignore or repeal. Secondly, in terms of immigration, it seems to me inevitable that the British government needs to set out, and sooner rather than later, our own immigration policy. Most countries in the world have an immigration policy. We can't have one effectively as a result of our membership of the European Union. And I think the result of the referendum made it pretty clear that people wanted our ability to control immigration. That doesn't mean to say no immigration, far from it. It does mean to say that the United Kingdom controls its own immigration. And that is not negotiable. It cannot be negotiable, and it will be a big mistake to put it into the basket of things that we would negotiate about with our former partners in the EU. And the third issue is trade, where I think we would have much more freedom to establish a successful free trade position with the rest of the world, were we able to do so. Now, the government will have to decide in the long run whether it wants to stay in the customs union or not, but I don't think it makes sense to pretend that we are likely to stay in the single market.
How battered has the bank been, do you think, by the Brexit vote? Because all sorts of suggestions, both publicly and privately, that Mark Carney got drawn too far into the politics of it. But where does it leave the independence of the Bank of England?
I don't think it has any long-lasting effect. I think Mr. Carney was put in an almost impossible position by the extreme views of the Remain and the Leave camps, both of which exaggerated the benefits and costs of leaving the European Union. He couldn't easily be seen to distance himself substantially from the government, and he tried very hard to stay out of the politics of it, and indeed he did do that. The only element where the bank had no choice but to comment was on the likely implications for the short-run behaviour of the economy, because it must make a judgment about that in order to set interest rates. But I don't think it has any long-lasting implications for independence of the bank.
You don't think that the bank has been proved wrong, which is what some of Mark Carney's enemies suggest, that actually in the warnings that they gave, we already know haven't come to pass?
We do not actually know what is going to happen over the next year, and I think it would be premature for anyone to make any judgment.
What's your view of the European Union now and its future? Because we talk on this programme endlessly about discussions with the European Union, and when we talk, we have a tendency to suggest that the European Union is a kind of entity with which we can do business that has a sort of fixed position of its own. And yet the European Union is not just economically, but politically as well, of course, in a crisis of its own.
It is, and I think we ought to look at this sometimes from the perspective of the EU and the other countries in it, and not from our own perspective. So I think the European Union is facing two existential problems, and it has answers to neither of them. The first is the fate of the monetary union, which even the European Central Bank is saying is in a critical position and needs major reform. And secondly, migration from outside the EU into the EU and the knock-on consequences of that for the principle of the free movement of people. I don't think they have answers to either of those issues, and it's a real crisis for the EU. The interesting issue, of course, is that British membership is irrelevant to those two questions. And from that perspective, I think they regard our decision to leave the EU as a sort of minor irritant, but it isn't major to thinking about the problems that they face.
Do you think we might see the beginning of the crack-up of the euro over the next year?
I think it's impossible to put any timescale on it, but they have simply not put in place the framework to make it a success. And they've been desperately trying to struggle from one month to the next. And for a long period, they were relying on the confidence that financial markets had in the words of its president, Mario Draghi, that they would do whatever it would take. Yeah.
Famous phrase.
Famous phrase.
And it made a difference in the short.
It made a difference for 3 years. But I think words in the end run out. You need to back it up by actions. And the problem now is that people in Germany and other countries in the northern part of the monetary union are deeply reluctant, understandably, to pay for countries in the south. That was not the prospectus they were offered when they joined monetary union.
What should they do then?
In the long run, it would make some sense to recognise that it was a mistake to go to monetary union as early as 1999. I think they might have been able to divide it into two divisions, Premier League and the second division, but I think it may be too late even to do that. So I think if you look at economies like Italy, Portugal, even France now, that they are really struggling. And Germany has such a large trade surplus because of its greater competitiveness that it can't invest that anywhere in the world where it can be guaranteed to get its money back. And I think as soon as German taxpayers see that their money is literally being thrown away, that they will start to ask serious questions about whether they want to remain part of it.
Lord King, Mervyn King, thank you very much.
Pleasure, thank you.